Hey, quite the chap here for Golfers RX. Today we're going to do something a little different than what we've been doing normally. We're going to do a roundtable talk. And today, joining me is Paul Kruger. He's part of the PGA. He's on the phone with us. And I got Dan Mann here from MyGolfSpy infamy. Today we're going to talk about the 20 most important changes to the rules of golf for 2019. We're not talking about each specific rule, but we're talking about stuff that's been in the news lately, why the radical changes, why the changes happened, and some of the controversy behind some of these changes.
Doctor? Doctor? Doctor?
Doctor?
Doctor?
Doctor?
Doctor?
The worst ruling I've ever seen in
The rules of golf
ever, and
wow.
certainly history.
At the professional level have become a joke.
What do you think of the new rules? From a perspective of a pro.
I like them. I think the underlying, the way I perceive the rules is to speed up play, definitely, such as leaving the flag stick in the hole, reducing the search time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, that sort of thing, and I think that's good for the game of golf.
And what do you think, Dan?
I think they're good. I think they have good intentions. I always worry that, they're getting away a bit of tradition that's already worked just to try and speed things up when there's so many other factors you could look at to possibly speed play up.
Why was knee height the gold standard right now?
I can't answer that question. I guess that was a compromise. They
Yeah.
wanted to have, if you're down at a quarter of an inch or any height, you're virtually placing the ball. And they wanted to have or keep the randomness of a dropped ball rather than the player being able to pick the spot. So the knee height, I think, was a reasonable compromise. It speeds up play, although Ricky's situation last week wasn't quite the situation when he went over, was it the 11th green, and had to drop a second time and eventually had to place the ball but that slope was just so severe.
Yeah.
That a drop ball from knee height was not going to stay there.
I think Jordan Spieth's words were he's trying to put the ball back into play, but the rules in this case worked against him where he couldn't actually put the ball in play before it rolled back into the hazard, which cost him a stroke, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. To me, anyway.
I was screaming at the TV, this is the stupidest rule I've ever seen. Why should he have to get penalized to take it back out after he did everything properly and walked away?
Yeah, would that be something that the USGA would, look at eventually and be like, that doesn't make any sense. We want putting the ball back into play. If it rolls back into a hazard that you're going to get penalized from, then maybe you just place the ball like you would on the putting green without being penalized?
I doubt that they'll do that. I think what needs to be done there, the quick solution, is the superintendent doesn't need to shave that slope down so low that it allows the ball at rest to roll down the slope.
Just in a broad sense of things, is it fair to re-penalize the player just to remove a ball from a hazard that he had zero intention of putting in there? Like, he did a proper job, placed it, it rolled back into the hazard, and they re-penalize him to take it out and put it back down.
Yeah.
I don't get how it wasn't his fault.
Yeah. Which is much like marking the ball on the green, whereas if the ball moves, you get to replace the ball without penalty.
Yeah. See, this is the beauty of the game of golf. It reflects life, and life isn't always fair.
But there seems to be a lot of confusion as well. And we're seeing that with recently with the caddies lining up the pros. And I think there was a tweak just recently as well by the USGA and R&A, wasn't there, Paul?
Yeah, they just came out with a clarification that when the initial rules for 2019 came out, there was a prohibition for the caddy standing behind the player, apart from the putting green, say the fairway, as the player began to take his or her stance. The caddy could not be there. That was not the case on the putting green. There was an exception for the putting green for the reason that it's been traditional for a caddy and the player to work together to read the line of putt. So on the putting green, the exception was, okay, we're not going to penalize the player if the caddy then moves out of the way before the player begins to take his or her stance.
Okay.
And there was a situation in Dubai with a Chinese player, Lee,
Yeah.
who got penalized because the caddy was there, albeit sort of looking away, starting to move away, but the player had begun to take his or her stance. And the player, and it cost him a pretty penny there.
Yeah, I think it was $100. I think it was $100,000 to his pocketbook, and I'm not sure what
It's
the
the end of
points.
season points, though.
Yeah, the end of season points. Yeah.
The worst ruling I've ever seen in golf ever in history.
Yeah.
The rule itself says begins taking the stance or stroke, which he sort of did, but it says the caddy deliberately stands on or close to the line to help them. What was deliberate about it? His head was turned before Houghton Lee even got there.
The reason there's an exception on the green is because they realize that both caddy and player have this symbiotic relationship where they're reading a putt very often. So it's often that a player is going to be on that line. But to not allow an exception in the fairway is saying that the same situation that exists on a green doesn't exist in a fairway. It most certainly does. You may not be reading break, but you're reading the multi-eddied effects of the wind on the shot. In a sense, the way the ball is going to react is the break.
And then there was one that was just overturned as well with Denny McCarthy.
Today, this was Denny McCarthy hit his second shot into the water and decided to play a fourth shot from here, dropping behind the margin of the penalty area. And you can clearly see he had taken his stance. His caddy was standing behind, and he has been assessed a two-shot penalty.
And Gary, if that happens on the putting green, the player can rectify.
A player was actually making his practice swings.
Yep.
He wasn't in position for the stroke, and the caddy was, back there helping him to line up, and then the player backed away and then or just moved in to play the stroke. So the caddy wasn't there when the player was beginning to take a stance for the stroke.
Yeah.
So now they basically said anywhere on the course, whether you're on the putting green or you're off the putting green, caddy can help you from behind and help you take your stance. But now you can back away. You can't be there when you're taking the stance for the actual stroke, but you can be there prior to making the stroke. The caddy can be there. But if the caddy needs to move out of the way, you back away and then come in on your own.
Yeah.
So, the idea is that it's the player whose talent is making the stroke and not getting carried away.
The caddy cannot be on your line when you are in your stance. Plain and simple, not begin. Stance. When you're in your stance, when you're ready to go, I get why they wrote the rule, certainly. It should be a player's responsibility to line up.
And we saw this in years past, really abused, if you want to use that word, by the LPGA caddies and players.
Yo, absolutely, yeah.
And that goes to pace of play as well. So, the caddy can give some advice lining up, but get the heck out of there, and the player backs away and then comes in on his or her own talent.
So, all these rules are supposed to help the pace of play. Do you think that we're going to start seeing more penalties for pace of play? Because I always thought that would be like a deterrent there. If it was like FedEx points or money or strokes, people getting penalized for pace of play, just like straight out of the box. It's like maybe you get a warning, but it's like, you know what, you're 5 minutes behind, or you took 45 seconds too long to line up this shot. Ding, you're done. Do you think we'll see something like that this year, where people do start getting penalized for slow play?
It is frustrating. I mean, there's a lot of slow players. A lot of them are the very good players too, which is kind of the problem. I think it's weird how you've got these set of rules where, we have to make sure it's dropping from knee height, or, the caddy can't be behind you. And then, they also have a rule where you got to hit it in 40 seconds, but that one's not enforced. You enforce some, but you don't enforce the others. So to me, it makes no sense. If you're going to do it, just penalize the guy. If they're going to take that long, I mean, I was explaining to someone the other day, if we get put on the clock, it's because we're slow. So obviously we've already broken the rules. Occasionally there's that one or two instances where I might be making a double, but the other guys, we've had to look for his ball, and it's just taking a little bit of time. But usually if you're put on the clock, it's because you're slow. And guys keep being put on the clock, keep doing it, and they're breaking the rules, but no one ever has the balls to actually penalize them.
I really have no idea.
Yeah.
I think time will tell, and we'll just see what happens. But the USGA, in terms of the new rules, has been a little bit more stronger in the language that says, I think one rule says that there's a recommendation the player should play his or her shot within 40 seconds. So, and the recommendation that players play ready golf in a reasonable and safe manner. So they're putting there to help improve pace of play, because we've got to get rid of these 5.5, 6 hour rounds. Try to get it down to more like 4 hour rounds.
Yeah, and do you mean like weekend golfer or pro?
I'm talking about the weekend golfer, the amateurs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm not privy to what the PGA may or may not do. I'm sure people will be put on the clock.
Yeah.
And time and that sort of thing. Whether penalties are handed down, it's up to the PGA.
See, I wondered after Brooks was so publicly vocal last week that, it shouldn't take over a minute to play a shot. Like, you guys are, like, this is stupid. Like, when you get your two-time major champion there last year, yeah, putting his own peers on blast.
Yeah.
Will the tours pay a little more attention to that? Yeah.
It'll be interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully. I mean, like, the thing is, sometimes it's painful to watch the golf, because it's the golf on TV anyway, because it's painfully slow, the amount of stepping in, stepping out, checking their books, not checking their books. It would be great to see if they simplified it, but which brings me actually to another point. Do you think that, there are a lot of people have said, Tony Finau has spoken out recently, so has Jordan Spieth, they've spoken out recently, that the rules of golf are just way too complicated. For someone who writes about the rules of golf all the time, are they too complicated? Do you think they're too complicated for just your weekend golfer?
Well, that's a great observation. I don't believe so. I might be into the minutia of the rules too much to back away. I've held several in-house sessions to sort of go over the basics of the new rules to our members, and they don't seem to be overwhelmed by them. It's going to be a learning process. I think on the tour, I've heard somebody say it's going to take about 3 months or so for the tours to work out the bugs, and probably a year for the rest of us, the club's amateur side of things. I think it just takes a little bit of discipline or dedication to get into the rules, and I would advise the average golfer to go to their pro and ask about things, and not wait till a club championship and do something that gets them in trouble for a 2-stroke penalty or a DQ or something like that.
Yeah.
But change is good, change is hard, and we'll just have to work through it. I don't think they're too difficult for the average golfer, though.
Yeah.
So nobody thinks that we're at the point where we need a pared down, simple rules of golf handbook for the average weekend golfer, like a reduced amount of rules just to get them out there, have fun, play the simplest game, and stick within an easier to read set of guidelines. Are we there yet, or do we have we've?
That's what the USGA is trying to accomplish, I believe, with the Players Edition of the rules.
Yep.
So it's the smallest of the 3 versions they've come out with. There's the Players Edition, and then there's the rules, and then there's the big, thick official guide for the rules officials. So there is a version for the average golfer, the amateur, to get started in. And it has highlighted blue sort of bullet points where if you want to get into the minutia, it says, for more information about this particular rule, we'll go to the rules book for more detail. So I think they've done that in a way with Players Edition.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see, like, a one sheet.
That's what I mean.
Like
here's 50 rules or 30. Stay within these, and
20.
you're gonna have a blast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on this phone call with us, and you're a wealth of knowledge, which you just showed us. So I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate you having me on it.